I never imagined that at 25 years old, I would be without my dad. He would never get to see me get married or have children. I would never get to go to him for advice about life's toughest moments. And worse, at 25 years old, I had no idea who I was as a man. I felt emotionally burnt out, tired, and almost hopeless. You see, certain milestones in life will expose you. Marriage exposes you, raising a family exposes you, entrepreneurship exposes you, death of a loved one, or your very own near-death experience exposes you. And when that happens, you have two options. You could either do the hard work that's necessary to deal with what you're feeling, or you can ignore it because it just feels too hard. When I lost my dad in 2014, I did the hard work necessary to understand why I was burnt out and what I was feeling. But yet, burnout happened again in 2020 when I was engaged to get married and at the height of my business. And this second time around, burnout was much more debilitating. So I've been around the block, and it's not a badge of honor I wear proudly, but because I have been around the block, today in this conversation with you, I want to share 5 things that I believe lead to burnout. And if you're currently feeling burnt out as a creative, at the end of this video, I'll share 3 ways that you can recover. But before I tell you what leads to burnout, it's important to define what burnout actually is. Burnout is a heightened state of mental, physical, and emotional exhaustion that can be caused by chronic stress. And depending on how long that stress lasts, it's easy for burnout to turn into depression and/or anxiety. So how do you know if you're experiencing burnout right now? It might be hard to get out of bed in the morning, or maybe you feel unmotivated to do work you once loved. Like for me, I noticed that it was hard for me to get excited about filming new projects. Or maybe you feel like you just can't catch a break, like there's just something always happening. Or you feel like the effort you're putting in doesn't really matter. It's almost as if you're not interested in much of anything. Unfortunately, I've experienced burnout quite a few times, and I wish there was someone who would have told me about burnout, or at least what leads to burnout. Because for a very long time, burnout held me back mentally and financially. To better understand my story and the journey that I've been on with burnout, let's go back to July 2014. I went to Spokane, Washington in 2014. July of 2014 for a leadership conference. I always knew leadership was important to me. Washington is the furthest northwest point of America. I live in Florida, the furthest southeast point of America. And I had this crazy idea that I would go on a 3-day Greyhound trip from northwest to southeast. I knew it would never happen again. And so I was just like, this will be cool. I'm 25 years old. Seems like something fun to do. By day 2 of this trip, we got to Chicago, Illinois, and I was miserable. It's a lot of weird people on the Greyhound. I had my phone off the entire time until day 2, and I turned my phone back on, and I get a text message from my sister, and it says, call me back, it's urgent. This is July 2014, and I knew at this time it was either mom or dad, so I braced myself. And I say it's mom or dad because in 2014, my mom had depression, and by that point had attempted suicide. My dad was diagnosed with prostate cancer. So I called my sister back. Fortunately, it ends up being my dad, and they told me they found him unresponsive in the house. So I get on the first flight back home to Florida. My brother comes to pick me up from the airport. He comes with his daughter, my niece, Ayana. I hug my brother, we don't say a word. I hug my niece, we don't say a word. But I sit in the back seat with Ayana. And I'm staring off in space because I'm 25 years old, I am the last of 10 children, and I feel lost because I did not anticipate that I would lose my father at 25. He hadn't had a chance to see me get married. He hasn't had a chance to see me have children. This is not what I anticipated life would look like. And then Ayana calls out to me. She says, Uncle, why did Grandpa have to die? And I stared at her. She said it again, why did Grandpa have to die? So I get home, we're making funeral arrangements. My family is asking me questions, what do we do, how do we do it? And then on the day of his funeral,
August 9th, 2014, I, Jude Charles, the youngest of 10 children, gives my father's eulogy. And it is in that moment that I realized not just that leadership was a part of my life, that was who I am. It is a part of my purpose.
Steve Jobs once said, "Dots do not connect looking forward. Dots connect only when you look backward. You must trust that by following your curiosity, the pieces will ultimately fit." Knowing that leadership was a part of my life, or the idea of leading through difficult moments was a part of my life, didn't happen overnight. It wasn't until I started taking extended breaks from work that I realized, oh, this is where I'm connecting the dots, as Steve Jobs has once said. I saw these moments that were big moments, whether it was moments like giving my father's eulogy at his funeral, or moments like, something big might have happened, but I came in, stepped in, and was level-headed, that I realized this idea of leading through difficult moments was important. It leads to the very first point that I think is a trap of burnout. What leads to burnout, right? It is not taking enough breaks. And I don't mean the 1 or 2 weeks that you might take vacation with your family. I mean time that you spend by yourself, with yourself, asking yourself questions, or even just reading books. Like, the very first person I ever heard taking breaks, or creative that takes breaks, is Bill Gates. He has what he calls these think weeks. And during the think week, he is reading a bunch of books. He goes to the cabin without a cell phone, without a laptop, without technology. He is just completely unplugged and thinking about what comes next. Since 2013, the year before my dad actually passed away, I began to take breaks. But I began to take breaks because I would realize that in November or December, during Thanksgiving or Christmas time, I would get all the way to that point in the year and then just feel so tired and disconnected when I would sit down and have Thanksgiving with my family. So I started November, December taking time off, plus November 19th is my actual birthday. So November, I'd take the whole month off, starting the first week. December, I'd take that whole month off. But somewhere in between there, I'll take a week to myself while I'll ask myself questions such as, what were the 3 biggest accomplishments in business? What were the 3 biggest accomplishments in personal development? What kind of projects do you want to do more of? What do you want to stop doing? Did you accomplish your goals from the previous year? And one of my favorites that I love to ask is, what was the 20% of the work that helped get you the 80% of the results? The reason that question is so important, because it's easy to look at, like, you did so much throughout that year, but there was really only 20% of the work that led to whether it's 80% of the results as far as what you wanted towards your goals, or 80% of the results as far as your income. The other thing too is that it's easy, let's just say hypothetically, you had one really bad client this year, and for you, that client took so much out of you that in your mind, it ruined the entire year. When in reality, you had one bad client, but then you had a great year where you did so many other things, where you improved in so many other areas. I remember my very first car that I had. It was a 2001 white Toyota Camry. And I wanted to make sure to take care of this car, so I took it to the tire shop to get 4 new tires, a brand new set of tires. But when I went to go talk to the mechanic, he said to me, hey, definitely, we have the new tires, but you're also gonna need an alignment. And I was like, an alignment? I don't need an alignment, just give me the brand new set of tires. Because in my mind, I'm thinking he's just trying to get more money out of me. So I get the 4 brand new tires, I drive off, and literally in a few months, I realized the tires are wearing down in one area. This guy has sold me some bad tires. So I go back to the tire shop and I say, hey, you sold me some bad tires. These tires are already wearing down. It's only been a few months. He said, no, I told you needed an alignment. So that's what you needed. The alignment would be an extra $100. And I was like, nah, I'm not spending an extra $100. Like, you sold me bad tires. So I decided to go to another tire shop. I asked them for brand new tires. The guy tells me the same exact thing. Hey, you're gonna need an alignment. I was like, wait, they're all in on this? Like, why do I need an alignment? I don't get an alignment. I get the tires, I take the car off the lot. Literally within a few months, the same thing happens. And then I finally realized maybe they were right. Oftentimes we get people in our life that'll tell us, hey, you need an alignment, or here's the actual solution you need. But we don't think they know what they're talking about. So we go about running around in circles. When you don't take a break, that's literally what happens is you go around in a circle because you don't realize the patterns that are happening in your life. You don't sit and look at, when you answer those questions, look at, hey, this is what's happening. This is why it's happened. Oh, this happened 6 months ago, or this happened 2 years ago. You don't see the patterns. So if you're committed to doing this and taking time off and wanting to ask yourself some of the same questions that I asked myself during my time off, I've included a link down below where you can get a copy of all the questions that I asked myself. That way you can look at what worked, what didn't work, and maybe how you may need to change how you're working in order to make sure you don't burn out next year. It has been over a decade that I have been doing my time off. It started November, December. Now I do it June and December. But I can look at patterns that started 2014, 2015, 2016, that I was able to say, oh, wait, no, that doesn't feel good. Let me do something different, and able to change it. Now, the other thing, if you noticed, when I talked about taking breaks, the second thing that came from taking that break is I discovered my purpose. My purpose is to lead and empower entrepreneurs to have relentless courage. That wouldn't have happened had I not taken a break. And that leads to the second thing that leads to burnout. It is not knowing your purpose. When I figured out my purpose, I began to work in a completely different way. I went from struggling to make $20,000 a year to charging well over 6 figures for one project. Why? Because when you know your why, your what has more impact. The work that I was doing, which was the what, began to have more impact because I understood that when I show up to a project, when I'm there to lead and empower entrepreneurs to have relentless courage, that is so much bigger than just creating a video, or so much bigger even than creating a documentary for an entrepreneur. And so when you know your why, your what has more impact. But if you don't know why, you'll continue chasing metrics that in reality may not even matter to you. You'll chase metrics and realize at the end of it, when you're tired and you're beat up from the project, you're like, why did I even do this? There is a deeper calling inside of you that once you get in alignment with who you are, you get in alignment with the core values you have, you get in alignment with choosing clients that are in alignment with your core values, it helps to bring more meaning to the work that you're doing. It helps to bring more meaning to your life. So I'm taking breaks and I know my why. So why did I burn out for a second time?
October 10th, 2020, I opened my eyes while I was in bed, but I could not move. My teeth were clenched, my heart was racing, my arms are at my side. Feels like I'm paralyzed. But I know I'm not paralyzed, but for some reason, for 2 hours straight, I could not get out of bed. After those 2 hours, I ended up calling a therapist to go see a therapist and was officially diagnosed with burnout. Started to work through why I was burnt out. And in working through that, I lost confidence because with burnout, you cannot work and operate the same way that you used to. I started the business at 17 years old and I prided myself on the fact that I could work hard. And if I work hard and I work long hours, I will be successful. Well, now in 2020, I'm being told that I can't work as hard as I used to. My work had become my identity. And so I lost my confidence because now I'm being told the way that I work, the way that I value myself through my work, I can't do it the same way I've been doing it. Fast forward to about September of 2021. I'm still working through burnout. I'm still working through understanding the diagnosis and understanding how to work differently. And I happen to go to a grocery store. I get out of the car, getting ready to walk in, and to my left, I hear a loud boom. I look over, and it is a Tesla, a white Tesla sedan, on top of another car. I race over to see if the people need help. The woman who's inside the car is thinking about climbing out, and then there's 2 guys standing outside just kind of looking, and I'm like, hey, did anyone call 911? Nobody answers me. Did anybody call 911? No one answered again, so I ended up calling 911. No one else had called 911, no one else knew what to do, but I stepped into action. That moment helped me understand who Jude Charles is outside of work. And so when you take the moment to look back, when you take the moment to put a mirror up and you slow down long enough to say, why did I do that? Why do I care about that? How did I learn that? That's how you know what you're made of.
What I want you to take away from that story is number 3 and number 4 as to what leads to burnout. Number 3, not asking for help. And number 4, tying your worth to your work. When I went through burnout the very first time in 2014, although I did the deep work and I took time off and I asked myself questions, I only did that work by myself. I hadn't called a therapist. I hadn't seen a therapist to allow that therapist to look at my life and also put up a mirror and say, hey, but what about this thing? And what about that thing? For example, one of the things that I was able to work through in therapy is that I never felt like I was enough. Being the youngest of 10 kids, the only entrepreneur, and feeling like my family didn't support me when I went on this entrepreneurial journey, I never felt like I was enough. I always felt like there was something missing, so I was working harder and harder to try to prove myself, when in reality, I had nothing to prove. But until I got that help from a therapist that I went to go see for 2 years, I wouldn't have realized that. The other thing to realize with asking for help as a man, it can be shown as a sign of weakness to ask for help. And so I had to also get over that roadblock of realizing like asking for help doesn't actually make you weak. Asking for help makes you stronger. So now I'm a big advocate for asking for help, whether it's in your personal life or even in business. I've hired coaches, business coaches in the past. I have continued to see a therapist regularly because no one is beyond asking for help. We all need it. We can't get through life without a community, without people that are around us to support us, whether that's friends or coaches or anyone. We all need the support. Another thing to look at when asking for help is actually hiring a team, even if it's one person. Like I have a mentor who mentioned something to me that actually was, in my mind at least, a little mind-blowing that I hadn't thought of before. Even if you feel like you can't hire a part-time person, let's just say hypothetically, you can't hire someone for 20 hours to come help you. In my case, I'm a filmmaker, so let's just say I can't hire an editor for 20 hours during the week. What if I hired an editor for 1 day out of that week? So 1 8-hour day. Like it may not sound like it's a lot of work, but that 8 hours could buy back your time and allow you to build up to the point where you could hire someone either part-time or full-time. And so asking for help is not just asking for help from a therapist or a coach, but it's also delegating some of the work that you're doing. In terms of number 4, tying my worth to my work, in that story that I shared about the Tesla car accident, I felt so down. I felt like because I couldn't work as hard, because I prided myself on working hard, that now somehow I was worthless. When in reality, my worth didn't come from the things that I do, which is the work. It came from just me being who I am. It tied back to what I talked about in the very beginning, is that leading through difficult moments was who I am. But I needed that reminder. I needed the reminder that what worked in my 20s may not necessarily work in my 30s. And so I have to constantly remind myself that my identity, my worth, has nothing to do with my work. All right, so let's jump to the last thing. Number 5, that leads to burnout, a trap to avoid that leads to burnout. Number 5 is always doing things the hard way. My parents immigrated to America from Haiti. I watched my parents work really hard. My father was a construction worker. My mom worked at a chair factory. So blue collar workers. Because I saw them work so hard, I, for some reason, began to look at life in that same way. Like, I hate to admit it, but I find it incredibly easy to make things hard and incredibly hard to make things easy. But it's because of the way that I grew up. And going all the way back to number 3, asking for help, unless I would have asked for help and really peeled back those layers and realizing how I grew up and what I saw growing up, I wouldn't even realize that was a pattern in my life. But that may be a pattern in your life too. Like if you find that something that's so easy to do is the thing that you avoid, why is that? Why is it that you might take something that should only take 5 minutes, but you make it take an hour? Because that's when it feels like, okay, I earned this, right? I know for me, that's what it was. Like, if I didn't sit down and do something for a very long time, then I didn't earn it, right? That somehow my worth, again, was tied to how long I work. When in reality, the value that I bring, the expertise that I bring to my projects doesn't have anything to do with time or trying to make it difficult. So quick recap as to the 5 things that lead to burnout, the 5 traps to avoid that lead to burnout. Number 1, not taking enough breaks. Number 2, you don't know your purpose in life. Number 3, not asking for help. Number 4, tying your worth to your work. And number 5, always doing things the hard way. So I want to offer you some hope if you're currently feeling burnt out. First, realize that you can make it through burnout, that there is hope on the other side. I have been through burnout twice, probably more times than that, truthfully, but I made it to the other side. And I know for sure now that after almost 20 years of being a creative entrepreneur, that I will more than likely not experience burnout again. Number 1 on the list on how to recover from burnout is to go see a therapist. You cannot do this by yourself. And if you've been avoiding it, I want to encourage you that although it's gonna feel hard to do the deep work, you will be so glad, like I am so glad, I've been through therapy and went through it. And like I mentioned, continue to see a therapist. So go get some help. You don't have to be ashamed about getting help. It doesn't mean you're broken or there's something wrong with you. Now, the second thing I'm gonna recommend is something that I actually started doing in 2014, the first time I went through burnout, but that I've continued to do all the way through that has helped me not just get through burnout, but really to help me grow my business too, and that's read. I started a journey back in 2014 where it was hard for me to read. I didn't like reading. So I put myself on a challenge that I would complete 1 book a month. And if I did that, then I wanted to see how much would I grow. Like, is this reading thing really that important? Well, at the end of 2014, I read 14 books. So instead of 1 book a month being 12 books, I read 14 books, and I grew my income by 40%. So I highly recommend reading, and I'm not just gonna tell you go read, I'm actually gonna recommend 4 books that I think you should read. Number 1 is Mindset. Mindset by Carol Dweck. It is a book about growth and about how to have an abundance mindset versus a scarcity mindset. So I think that's really important. Number 2 that I'm gonna recommend is Not Fade Away. This is a book by Peter Barton. Peter Barton was a media executive. He actually wrote this book, I believe, when he got stomach cancer, but it was a very eye-opening book about what matters most in life and how he was practically on his deathbed. He was only given a few months to live, and he decided to write a book about life, really, and just about his own life and what he went through. The third book is also very unconventional. It is Malcolm Gladwell, Talking to Strangers. The reason I'm recommending this is because I think we make a lot of assumptions about other people and we put expectations on other people, but we also put those expectations on ourselves. And I kind of want you to read that book with a different view, not just about what Malcolm Gladwell talks about, which in the book he talks about meeting strangers and expecting them to act one way, but they actually act a completely different way. I want you to consider getting to know yourself better, that maybe you might be a stranger to yourself. And then the final book that I'm going to recommend that's actually been pretty beat up here is Peak. Peak by Anders Ericsson. And this is a book about success and about, it says, the secrets from the new science of expertise. That book, Peak, helps to reshape your mind as to what success, what it takes, and what it really looks like. And finally, number 3 on how to recover from burnout. Spend more time outside. Whether that's walking or gardening or even just going to the park, spend more time outside. Almost every day I take a walk on a trail that's actually behind where I live. And on my way back home recently, from walking on this trail, I had the weirdest thing happen to me, where out of nowhere, a squirrel falls flat on his face out of a tree. He falls on the asphalt. And I am stunned because this squirrel falls, but he doesn't move. And I'm not moving. And I'm like, what is going on here? And then literally out of nowhere, this squirrel jumps up, almost as if like he doesn't know where he is. He runs to the base of the tree and he climbs back up. Like, that was such a weird moment, but that moment reminded me that that's a part of life. Sometimes you're gonna get rocked and you're not gonna see it coming. right? Like squirrels, they run up and down trees. I'm sure this is not his first time falling. And so I want to encourage you, if you're going through burnout, I know it feels suffocating, it feels debilitating, it feels like there's no hope. But just like that squirrel, I want to remind you that you can get back up again, get up in the tree, and continue to have fun. Avoid the traps that lead to burnout. At the very least, pick up a book to read, because that book will help to reshape your mind, and it'll help to take you to a different place. That's not escapism, but take you to a place that helps you to reframe the things that might have happened to you.